Hello everyone, my name is Nolan Delip, and my presentation is on racial disparities in the juvenile justice system. The United States incarcerates more youth than any other country in the world. More than 1.6 million youth are processed annually. The issue of disproportionate minority confinement, also known as DMC, has been a growing concern for decades, dating back to the 1960s. DMC is seen throughout all the stages of the juvenile justice system. The question I was attempting to address is what is the current extent of racial and ethnic disparities within the juvenile justice system? My subcategories included definitions, how to measure disparities, federal legislation, comparison of disparities between different races, which was broken into white versus black, white versus Latinx, white versus tribal and Native American, females, and the decline in rates. Other subcategories included factors, consequences, the importance of the issue, and recommendations. My first source is a scholarly article that focuses on and investigates the issue of DMC. The study examines the disparities between black and white youth following their involvement with the juvenile justice system. The main finding in this source was when using Blumstein's formula, the expected percentage of African Americans in juvenile placement was 34.1%, yet the actual percentage was 42.1%. This disproportionality in juvenile placement should be viewed as a cumulative measure of systemic bias that occurs after juveniles are taken into custody. This study gathered data from the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention, as well as the FBI and Uniform Crime Reports. Blumstein's formula served as the basis for the analytical procedures and to calculate the level of racial disproportionality of juveniles in placements explained by arrests. They used the equation as seen here on the screen. My second source was another scholarly article that explored the historical context and current state of racial disparities, as well as the root causes, including bias-based decision-making, profiling, and systemic inequality. The article found that disproportionate involvement of minority youth occurs in all stages of the juvenile justice system, and they recommend classifying disproportionality as a natural social disaster. My third source was a public report which analyzed a wide variety of academic studies, research papers, and publications. The review explores the prevalence and extent of racial and ethnic disparities in various stages of the justice system and highlights the contributing factors. The key finding was that racial disparities occur at all of the following contact points in the juvenile justice system: arrest, referral, detention, diversions, petitions, delinquency findings, confinement, probation, and transfer to adult courts. Therefore, racial disparities occur in all stages throughout the juvenile justice system. My fourth source was a public report and study that examined the issue of DMC and looked at the prevalence of DMC and the potential consequences for youth. The key finding is that minority youth are overrepresented in the juvenile justice system due to differences in patrolling, profiling, and processing of minorities by law enforcement, courts, and correctional staff and systems. The study used longitudinal data to track the experiences of youth involved in the justice system over a one-year period. They used a crossroads study, which was an ongoing multi-site assessment with a population size of 1,216 adolescents who ranged from 13 to 17 years of age. Any youth who completed both of the interviews were provided with compensation. My fifth source was a scholarly article that looked at various national attempts to address these disparities. The authors looked at the extent to which race and ethnicity influence decision-making at various stages of the juvenile justice system. The main findings were that Black American youth were more likely to be arrested than white youth, and that justice-involved individuals have lower graduation rates, worse physical and mental health, poor social and family relationships, higher unemployment rates, higher rates of homelessness and eviction, and increased rates of violence. The study used quantitative data and statistics, and it looked at Sussman and colleagues' study in Washington State to assess the disparities experienced by different racial and ethnic groups. They found that African American youth were 7 times more likely to be in custody than white youth, and Hispanics were 1.5 times more likely. This report focused on racial disparities and analyzed the data and trends related to the disproportionate representation of Black youth and the contributing factors. This report found that the national placement rate in 2019 was 114 per 100,000. However, the Black placement rate was 315 per 100,000, and white youth were 72 per 100,000. They did find that disparities grew by more than 10% in 11 states, but they did find that they decreased by at least 10% in 23 states. Between 2015 and 2019, Black American youth rates declined by 54%, which was a faster decrease than white youth. This report examined the prevalence and impact of racial and ethnic disparities involving Latinx youth throughout various stages of the justice process. The main findings of this report were that the incarceration rate for Latin youth is 80% higher than white youth, and they are 28% more likely to be placed in juvenile facilities. Between 2011 and 2019, Latin youth rates declined by 26%. Latinx youth are more likely to be in custody than white youth in 31 states and less likely in 11 states. This report examined the prevalence of racial and ethnic disparities involving North American and Indigenous youth throughout the juvenile justice system. The report found that in 2010, the tribal youth incarceration rate was 2.9 times higher than white youth, but by 2019 it increased by 14% to 3.3 times. Tribal youth are more likely to be arrested and in custody than white youth in all but 2 states. This scholarly article provided an in-depth look to determine if girls are becoming more involved in delinquent activity and behaviors, or if shifts in societal perceptions and responses to girls' behavior contribute to the changes. The study found that Black American girls are incarcerated at a rate of 214 per 100,000, Native American girls at a rate of 209 per 100,000, and white girls at 68 per 100,000. In 1980, white girls were significantly more likely than Black and Hispanic girls to be charged, but by 2000, the roles had changed. This study analyzed data from previous studies, the National Crime Victimization Survey, the National Longitudinal Survey of Youth, and FBI arrest statistics to explore the trends in juvenile justice involvement for girls. Between the surveys, more than 20,000 girls, ranging from 12 to 20, were included, and the study found that Black American and Native American girls were held in custody at 3 times the rate of white girls. This scholarly article looked at the extent and implications of racial disparities at various stages and examines the underlying factors such as socioeconomic and family issues that contribute to the disparities and how they affect the outcomes and experiences of youth. The article found that youth of color make up 34% of the U.S. population, yet they make up 62% of the youth charged in the juvenile justice system. It also mentions how white youth are seen as less blameworthy and more responsive to treatment, while youth of color are seen as deserving of placement and viewed as small adult criminals. The article found that school consequences such as suspensions and expulsions, socioeconomic factors such as poor family structure, poverty, neighborhood violence, and the policies and policing practices have a disproportionate impact on communities of color and have caused youth of color to be overrepresented. My last source was a book that explored the historical evolution of the American juvenile justice system and its practices, the treatment of youth offenders, and the disparities faced by minority youth. The book mentioned how the term disproportionate minority confinement was amended to disproportionate minority contact to highlight that race directly and indirectly impacts juvenile justice system decisions through all stages of the system. And in order to address these disparities, a clear definition of goals and priorities is necessary and essential to intelligent policy planning. So looking at the results of the research, racial disparities are evident at all stages and contact points throughout the juvenile justice system. While we have seen juvenile placement rates decline, the national placement rate has dropped from 356 per 100,000 in 1997 to 114 per 100,000 in 2019. Unfortunately, disparities are still extremely high. In 2019, white youth had a rate of 72 per 100,000, compared to Black youth at 315 per 100,000, Latinx youth at 92 per 100,000, and Native American tribal youth at 236 per 100,000. There are multiple factors that contribute to the disparities we are witnessing. The 2 most common factors are biased policing and practices, as well as socioeconomic factors. Involvement in the juvenile justice system can have devastating future consequences for both the family and the individual. Future research. Yes, I would consider future research in this topic area since I've always been very interested in the topic, and in previous classes I have done research on racial disparities that occur in either the juvenile or adult justice system. I'm also a youth of color myself. I'm half East Indian, so being a youth of color has made me more intrigued with this research area. And lastly, this issue does not just occur in the United States. It is a worldwide issue and it affects different races and ethnicities in different countries. Thank you for listening to my presentation. I hope you enjoyed it.